He did these terrible things to Colleen Ritzer, and she was only 24 years old.
I took away someone's mother, their grandma, sister, friend. I had no right to do so.
You and Nate attacked her?
It was both of us.
With what?
Like hammer thing, and then like a hammer thing with an axe at the other end.
Did you at some point believe that you were in love with Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
Despite being so young, the children in this video have committed some of the most horrifying crimes you can ever imagine. But while some do show remorse for what they did, others don't seem to care. Let's take a look at the worst child criminal court reactions caught on tape. In 2012, Antonio Barbaro, who was just 12 years old at the time, took the life of 78-year-old Barbara Olson, his own great-grandmother. With the help of his teenage friend, Nathan Pape, he brutally bludgeoned her to death with a hammer and a hatchet. It's safe to say that their young lives were transformed forever.
A teenager's chilling murder confession. Jurors heard a recording of 13-year-old Nathan Pop murdered the friend's great-grandmother.
Antonio knew that his great-grandmother had money, so his motive was to kill her so that he could rob her. He brought Nathan into the plan to help him. The two boys came to Barbara's home and she opened the door for them. But as soon as she turned her back to them, Antonio attacked her with the hammer, hitting her on the head repeatedly while she cried out, begging him to stop. Nathan also struck her with a hammer. In total, she was struck 27 times. 18 of those blows were to the head. Once the boys knew that Barbara was dead, they raided her house and took her purse, money, and jewelry. Then they dragged her body into the garage and cleaned up the mess. The teens later got into Barbara's car and Nathan drove it to a bowling alley and pizzeria where they used the stolen money to enjoy themselves. Because he wasn't yet tall enough to see over the steering wheel, Nathan had to sit on a pillow. They later abandoned the vehicle, hoping that someone would steal it and be blamed for the murder. But it didn't go as planned. When police found the vehicle and searched it, they discovered a school paper with the name Nate on it. This and other evidence would later lead them to the two teens who were arrested for Barbara's murder. The boys were questioned separately.
We've been involved in a serious investigation, okay? There's a lot of different people that have been talked to already about this serious investigation, and you're one of them that we wanted to talk to, hoping that you can clarify some things, okay?
All right.
He seems pretty calm for a kid who just murdered somebody, but we'll have to watch to see how this plays out.
There was a serious incident involving your great-grandmother, I believe. Do you know who that would be?
On
her name
my
is?
side. My side.
Yeah, I think it is.
Then Grandma Barb.
Okay, what's her, is it grandma or great-grandma?
I just say Grandma.
Antonio is still unemotional.
Do you know anything at all about what may have happened to her? Have you heard anything? Do you know anything at all?
No, what happened?
Okay. Well, like I said, it's a serious incident. She's not doing that well, and I'll get more to it later as far as the other people that we've talked to, what came up, so, okay?
The detective is purposely trying to put some fear into Antonio's mind here. He doesn't know who the police have talked to, or if they've talked to Nathan. He tells police that it's been about 2 months since he's seen Grandma Barb, and provides vague answers in regard to what he was doing in the days leading up to the attack. In a separate room, Nathan is being interviewed by a different detective.
We're here to talk with you, and we want to talk to you because we understand that you are friends or somehow associated with a person by the name of Antonio Barbo.
Yeah.
Tino? I understand he goes by the name Tino?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're friends with Tino?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, when's the last time you think you saw Tino?
Yesterday.
Yesterday? And where was that at?
Just down on the corner of this block.
Nathan hesitantly admits that he saw Antonio the same day as the murder occurred. Meanwhile, the other detective is trying to worry Antonio more by telling him that people saw someone that matched his description at Grandma Barb's house recently.
Do you have any enemies that for any reason at all would lie about something like that? Especially if there was a serious incident involving your great-grandma that they would want to point the police to you, basically?
Not really. For sure not in Falls, because I barely go there.
The detectives then tried to determine if money could play a role in Antonio's decision to plan something like this.
If you need something, if you need new clothes, if you want some soda, if you want something like that, does your mom give you the money, or how does that work, or you just don't get it, or what?
Like, if it's not that much, my mom will usually get it, but otherwise, I really don't get stuff.
Then it was finally time to turn the pressure on.
If I were to tell you that your great-grandma Barb Olson was killed, would that surprise you?
The 12-year-old appears frozen in place.
Would you have any idea at all how that could have happened?
No.
No idea at all?
No.
I take it you're not real close to her as far as hearing that news and just...
I mean, as I said, I never, talked to her that often.
The detective continues to question him, but all the while, Antonio does not once ask what happened to his grandma. While Antonio is sticking to his lies, Nathan is not keeping as strong of a front up.
It's pretty important that you not try to cover for him. You know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying? Okay.
At this point, Nathan's voice is barely above a whisper, and then he does something surprising. He asks for a piece of paper.
Can I write it down? Can you write it down? Yeah. Yeah, you can write it down.
Nathan then wrote down 9 words and handed the note to the detective.
Because you wrote that down, Nate, I want to be able to read Miranda rights to you. You understand what I'm saying?
This makes it sound like Nathan has now made a confession. The detective then tells Nathan's mom what he has written on the paper.
So, Bobby, you heard us read the Miranda rights to your son, right? Okay.
Nathan is now ready to tell the truth about what happened.
On Monday, when you got home from school, what happened, Nate?
We were talking, the lady said, I know how to get money.
When Nathan first heard about Antonio's plan to kill Barbara, he thought it was a joke. It quickly became clear how serious he was. Finally, Antonio breaks down as well.
You and Nate attacked her?
It was both of us.
With what?
Hammer thing, and then a hammer thing with an axe at the other end.
Then he explains that this was a premeditated killing.
We were deciding if and how we were gonna do it, and then how we would get a ride there, how we get a ride back.
Both boys were charged with first-degree intentional homicide. During the trial, they would both testify against one another.
Authorities say Pop and his friend Antonio Barbaro killed Barbo's great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, for money. Prosecutors played audio of an interview with this state special agent.
He told me to hit her. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to, but I didn't want him hitting me, so I hit her.
Earlier in the day, jurors saw the 2 suspected murder weapons. First, a common household hammer, then the police evidence technician held up this hatchet.
In court, Nathan would try to suggest that he felt he had no choice but to go along with Antonio's plan.
Why were you scared? That if I don't do what Antonio says, that he might try something on me.
Nathan's case would go to a jury. What would his fate be? Would the jury believe his claim? He kept a straight face as the verdict was read.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Nathan J. Pop, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
14-year-old Nathan Pop guilty of brutally murdering a 78-year-old woman, Barbara Olson.
Nathan was found guilty of murder, but what sort of sentence could he be facing?
Now, because Nathan Pop is under 18, he cannot by law be sentenced to life without parole.
At his sentencing, Nathan offered an apology.
I just want to say that I'm truly sorry for everything that happened. I truly regret every single thing that happened that day. Every single day that went by, I wish I could go back in time to stop everything from happening. That's it.
Nathan was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole until he is 45 years old. Meanwhile, Antonio would end up taking a plea deal to try to lower his prison time.
Teen killer sentenced for taking his great-grandmother's life. Instead of starting his freshman year in high school, Antonio Barbaro is set to begin a long prison sentence.
Antonio's sentence was severe, but what the court felt was deserved.
14-year-old Antonio Barbaro does not even know how to shave yet, but he does know he will be in prison until at least his 50th birthday. At times, Barbaro wiped tears from his face in court. Then he shook his head and smirked when the prosecutor spoke. Barbaro appeared too overwhelmed to read his own statement, handing his handwritten notes to his attorney.
Antonio began to read his statement, but became overwhelmed by tears.
I know I don't show my emotions much, and I myself am not sure why, but that doesn't mean I don't.
He sobbed as his lawyer finished reading his statement. Family members of both the defendants and the suspect had mixed opinions about the sentence. Some came forward asking for Antonio to be eligible for parole after 20 years.
I can tell that Tino feels very badly about participating in killing my mother.
But others felt that the sentence he received was justified for what he did. Stephen Olson, the victim's son, felt that the sentence was fair.
He won't necessarily get out when he's 50, but he'll still have to prove that he's worthy to become a member of this society. So I think that's the way it should be.
The prosecutor pointed out the fact that after brutally killing Barbara, the boys went on to have themselves a good time, as if nothing happened.
It's crazy.
You know, less than 24 hours after they did this, they're out buying pizza.
On November 26th of 2001, 13-year-old Derek and his 12-year-old brother Alex King would take the life of their own father, 40-year-old Terry Lee King, a resident of Florida. They killed Terry with an aluminum baseball bat and were later arrested. They claimed that they did this in hopes of getting away from abuse at the hands of their father. But was this really the case? When Terry was 23 years old, he began dating a woman named Janet. The two started living together and soon gave birth to 2 sons, Derek and then Alex. But the family struggled financially, and Terry and Janet would later break up, but continued living in the same home. Janet would even have 2 more children, but sadly their financial struggles didn't end, and they could no longer afford to care for their children. They took the children to a crisis center where they were cared for by a new family. But eventually the center had to shut down, and they were unable to keep the kids. The children were split up among different families. Alex did not respond well to his new family and was returned to live with his dad. At this point, Janet was mostly out of the picture, and there was no child care for Alex. So he would come to Terry's work, a printing place, where he would spend most of his days on his own. By 2001, things were better for Terry and he was more financially stable. But his son Derek wasn't doing as well. He was getting in trouble at school, and the family he had been staying with said they could no longer take care of him. So he had to return home to live with Terry and Alex. Derek didn't take this transition well at all. He had friends where he used to live, and now he was starting over again. Things would quickly go from bad to worse when both boys disappeared on November 16th. Terry called the sheriff's office to report them missing. They would turn up a few weeks later, but it wouldn't be long before a shocking tragedy would occur. In the early hours of November 26th, the fire station would be called to attend a fire at Terry's home. The fire was consuming the entire home and took a long time to get under control. When the firefighters made it inside, they found Terry, and he had been murdered. But there was no sign of either Alex or Derek. The 2 young boys were later found by a family friend and brought to the police station, where they were shockingly both arrested and charged with the murder of their own father. They were held at a juvenile detention center, and it was determined that due to the severity of the crime, they would be tried as adults. What could have possibly been a motive here? The boys claimed that they had killed their father to escape their rough home life and their father's strict parenting. But those that knew Terry, including his ex-girlfriend Janet, said that none of this seemed right. Terry was known to be a loving father who never so much as yelled at his children and didn't have a mean bone in his body. The court proceedings were unlike anything the nation had seen before. How could 2 young boys have done something like this to anyone, let alone their dad? It would turn out that they did have help from an adult outsider.
Stand currently is Alex King. He is one of the young men accused of actually brutally beating or helping to beat his father to death. Although this is not his trial, this is the trial of Mr. Chavis, the adult co-defendant, who is having a separate proceeding. They're now discussing whether or not this young man should be questioned as to whether or not he really understands what's going on. He's 13 years old now, 12 at the time the crime was committed.
Ricky Chavis was the family friend that dropped the boys off at the police station, but now he was being suspected of being an accessory to the murder. Investigators would need to get information from the boys to figure out exactly what that role was.
Do you know Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
See him in his courtroom?
Yes, sir.
Point to him, describe him.
He's wearing gray suit, white shirt.
How long have you known him?
I don't know, about 3 years, I think.
How did you meet him?
My dad introduced them to me.
Now, Alex's relationship with Ricky was not the typical relationship that a young boy would have with his father's friend. It was much darker.
Now, did you develop a relationship with Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
Did you at some point believe that you were in love with Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
Did you write some notes and letters about how you felt about Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
The signs are pointing towards something very inappropriate going on here. It appears this young boy has been manipulated by a predator. But what role did this relationship have in regards to Terry's murder? As it would turn out, Ricky had a history of inappropriate behavior with young boys. Despite this, he was still allowed around both Alex and Derek, and neighbors of Ricky claimed that they often saw young boys hanging around his mobile home. While police would still have to work towards figuring out whether or not Ricky convinced the boys to do this crime, they confessed to a detective what they had done. Alex was taking most of the blame.
He said he made sure that his father was asleep, and he got the bat and he hit him over the head.
Now, did he indicate how many times you hit him over the head?
Yes, he said approximately 10 times.
Derek told police that he was angry with his dad because he saw him push Alex into a table, causing him to cry. They both discussed killing Terry beforehand, but Alex said it was his idea.
He said Derek took the hits, but I gave him the idea.
After the murder, the boys called Ricky Chavis.
Alex said, come get us, quick.
Rick Chavis, a family friend, says the boys hid out at his home after the murder.
The reason why I wanted to wait was so that at least they would be calmed down enough to talk to investigators.
But police don't think his participation stopped there. Chavis, too, has been charged with first-degree murder.
It was also determined that Ricky had washed the boys' bloody clothing for them. But even if Ricky was convicted of Terry's murder, it still didn't mean that the boys were innocent. The boys' grandfather, as well as other family members, chose to stand by them.
I do not believe that they were capable of doing such a heinous crime as this.
Alex and Derek took a plea deal to avoid a longer prison sentence. This meant that they had to plead guilty to both second-degree murder and arson.
Do you think this agreement, Alex, is in your best interest? Do you think it's what's best for you under the circumstances of this case? What about you, Derek? Do you think this agreement is do you think it's in your best interest based upon the circumstances and the totality of all the circumstances in this case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ultimately, Judgment Day would come after the jury had prepared their verdict. Watch as they enter the courtroom and take their seats alongside their attorneys on the day that the verdict was to be read. They look small and vulnerable. It's hard to believe they were there for a murder charge.
In the Circuit Court in and for Escambia County, Florida, State of Florida Plaintiff versus Derek King Defendant, case number 015612B. Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment. Guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser-included offense, without a weapon. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment. Guilty of arson as charged.
You could see family members in the courtroom wiping away tears as both Derek and Alex were convicted of killing their father. This was a very controversial verdict for many reasons. First of all, many did not believe that a 12 and 13-year-old should be tried as adults. Secondly, there was evidence that suggested lewd behavior between Alex and Ricky. Despite having confessed to their father's murder, they would at one point change their story and say that Ricky had killed Terry so that he wouldn't find out about his relationship with Alex and that he had convinced the boys to take the fall for it, telling them they would face less prison time due to them being children. Whatever really happened that night, the world may never know for certain, but Derek would eventually be sentenced to 8 years behind bars while Alex got 7. They have since been paroled. Ricky, on the other hand, was found guilty of false imprisonment for holding the boys at his home. He was also found guilty of accessory to murder. In total, these charges earned him 35 years behind bars. On October 22nd of 2013, Philip Chisholm took the life of his math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. Colleen was just 24 years old at the time, and a kind woman who was loved by many and was deeply dedicated to her job. But it's the specifics of how Philip killed her and the horrific and brutal torture he inflicted that made this individual one of the most memorable and twisted child killers of recent years. Colleen Ritzer had been teaching 9th grade at Denver High School for about a year. She was a family-oriented person who took pride in her teaching and wanted to help her students succeed. It was because of her dedication to her students that on this particular day, she was staying after hours to help a few students who were struggling with their schoolwork. One of these people was 14-year-old Philip Chisholm. Colleen left her classroom for a bathroom break, but stopped to briefly speak with a fellow teacher in the hallway. Colleen went to the bathroom on the 2nd floor, but would not make it out alive. Just hours later, a woman named Diana Chisholm called to file a missing persons report. She said that her son Philip, who had recently begun school at Denver High School, had not gone to his sports practice or returned home. Meanwhile, there was another concerned parent, Colleen's father. Colleen had not returned either, and he had gone to school to look for her. He found her car sitting in the parking lot, but no sign of her. Now, everyone was looking for the missing teacher and student, who had been around each other at the end of that school day. Later that day, an officer would end up picking up Philip and patting him down. Inside his bag, they discovered a bloody box cutter, Colleen's ID, and credit cards, as well as a pair of underwear that would later be determined to be hers. He claimed that he just found the items lying around. But when they pressed him to tell the truth, he simply said he had gotten them from the girl. He would also say that Colleen was in the woods and no longer alive. While he was taken into custody, the police would make a devastating discovery. Colleen's body was found in a wooded area near the school. Philip did many horrible things to her, including stabbing her, strangling her, and taking advantage of her body. Her body was found half naked, and next to it was a note that read, "I hate you all." Police began sorting through surveillance footage inside the school to see how this twisted sequence of events could have possibly played out. They saw Colleen leave her classroom, and then just a short time later, Philip could be seen following her. He had his hood up and was wearing gloves. Philip followed her into the bathroom, where he then began to brutally attack her. A short while later, Philip then could be seen walking quickly out of and into the school building. He later returned to the classroom, this time wearing a black ski mask that covered his face. He found the recycling bin, which he then pulled into the bathroom. He put Colleen inside and then took her out of the building, even passing other people as he went. After taking her to the woods, he defiled her body and left her there, covered in sticks and dirt. Philip, who was tried as an adult, was charged with murder, rape, and robbery. The prosecutor painted a brutally painful image of what the last moments of Colleen's life were like.
What should have been a normal day in the middle of the afternoon. And make no mistake, they didn't happen to Philip Chisholm. He did these terrible things to Colleen Ritzer, and she was only 24 years old. And the only still image that matters in this case is the image of Colleen in the woods. The image that the defendant painted of Colleen stripped, battered, brutalized, and violated.
This was a brutal trial. At one point, Colleen's bloody jeans were brought out to show the jury just how horribly she suffered. The case was handed over to the jury, who reached a verdict on December 15th of 2015. Watch as he maintained a straight face as it was read.
Guilty, deliberate premeditation, and extreme atrocity with cruelty.
Then, when it was time for sentencing, Colleen's loved ones had the opportunity to speak on her behalf. Her parents expressed anger and deep pain. Loved ones gathered in the courtroom wearing pink, Colleen's favorite color.
Her killer knew exactly what he was doing and has never shown remorse. I hate Colleen's killer and will never forgive him.
Today, the good must prevail over the evil. You need to remember that Colleen matters.
Colleen did nothing to deserve this. She only wanted to help people.
The judge also shared his thoughts regarding the case.
When something terrible happens, people will often say it could always be worse. It is difficult for this court to imagine what could be worse for an individual or a family to endure than the brutal and senseless murder of Colleen Ritzer. Colleen Ritzer lived a life of quiet heroism. That's what most teachers do. Henry Adams observed that a teacher affects eternity. She can never tell where her influence stops. Colleen Ritzer's parents, more than most, have learned the reach of their daughter's influence, but at a cost no parent should have to endure.
Finally, it would be revealed how long Philip would be spending behind bars.
For the period of not less than 40 years.
Philip Chisholm will serve 40 years in prison before he gets a chance for parole. His mother broke down in tears on hearing it.
Philip showed little to no emotions when his sentence was read. Colleen's parents had hoped for a more severe sentence, but because he was only 14 years old at the time of the crime, life without possibility of parole would not be an option here. For now at least, the monster that stole the life of this beautiful young teacher remains behind bars.